Esme stared at the faint glow of her phone screen, her hands trembling as she typed. The tiny one-bedroom apartment around her was silent, except for the low hum of the fridge. The worn-out couch she sat on sagged beneath her weight, a constant reminder of how tightly she'd been holding things together. Bills piled on the counter next to an empty can of baby formula. Brinley, her 3-year-old daughter, slept peacefully in the next room, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mother's chest. Her thumb hovered over the send button as doubt gnawed at her. This wasn't the first time she'd had to reach out for help, and it stung every time. She took a deep breath, pushed past her pride, and hit send. The message read, "Claire, can you lend me some money?" "Just until payday. Brinley's out of formula. I'm so sorry to ask again." Setting the phone down, Esme buried her face in her hands, trying to stifle the shame that came with it. She hated relying on others, even her best friend Claire. But before she could let her self-pity spiral, the phone buzzed. A reply. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up, expecting Claire's usual supportive tone. But the words on the screen made her blood run cold. "Wait, I'm coming over now." Her stomach churned as she stared at the sender's name. Curtis. Curtis? Number no. She scrolled up to confirm her worst fear. Instead of Claire's name, the message had gone to Curtis, a man she hadn't spoken to in years, her ex-husband, the Curtis who now graced business magazines and Forbes lists, the tech mogul billionaire who had walked away from their life when it got too messy. Her fingers fumbled to compose a response. "Sorry, wrong person. Ignore this." She hit send, her pulse hammering in her ears. But before she could take a breath, the screen lit up again with a banking notification. Her jaw dropped. $1 million. Esme stared at the number, blinking as if her disbelief could make it disappear. The sender's name confirmed it. Curtis Dalton. Her hand flew to her mouth as she paced the small room, trying to make sense of the situation. $1 million. For formula. He couldn't be serious. A sharp knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Her heart raced. It couldn't be him. Not this fast. Could it? She hesitated before stepping toward the door, her palms sweaty. Another knock followed, louder this time. With trembling fingers, she opened it. There he was, Curtis Dalton, in the flesh. His sharp suit fit him like a second skin, his presence commanding as ever. He looked down at her with an unreadable expression, his blue-grey eyes piercing through the tension. "Esme," he said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk." Esme froze, gripping the edge of the door as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Curtis stood there like he owned the world. And, in many ways, he did. The last time she had seen him, he was walking away from the mess their marriage had become, leaving her with nothing but broken promises and a newborn in her arms. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't care. Anger was easier than vulnerability. Curtis stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the cramped apartment. The small space seemed even smaller with him in it, his tailored presence clashing with the worn furniture and peeling wallpaper. He turned to face her, his jaw tightening. "You needed help," he said simply, as if that justified everything. "I didn't ask for your help," Esme shot back, closing the door with more force than necessary. "That message wasn't meant for you." "But you sent it to me," Curtis countered, his calm demeanor unshaken. "And I'm here now, whether you meant to or not." Esme let out a bitter laugh, pacing the tiny living room as frustration bubbled to the surface. "Do you even hear yourself? You show up out of nowhere, throw money at me and expect me to… what? Be grateful? Forget everything you…" Her words faltered as Curtis took a step closer, his eyes softening, though his voice remained firm. "Esme, stop. This isn't about the past, it's about Brinley." The sound of her daughter's name stopped her in her tracks. She crossed her arms, defensive. "You don't get to say her name like that. You walked away, Curtis. You left us. And now you think you can just— What? Buy your way back into her life?" "I'm not trying to buy my way into anything," Curtis replied, his voice tinged with a frustration of his own. "But I can't stand by knowing you're struggling, not when I can do something about it." Esme opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, the weight of everything, her financial strain, her resentment toward Curtis, her constant worry about Brinley, pressed down on her like a tidal wave. She slumped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, there was silence. Then Curtis sat down in the chair across from her, giving her space but refusing to leave. "I made mistakes," he admitted quietly. "I know that. But I'm here now, Esme. Let me help." Esme lifted her head, meeting his gaze. The sincerity in his voice was disarming, but she couldn't let herself believe it. Not yet. "This doesn't mean you get a free pass," she warned, her voice trembling. "You don't just get to walk back into our lives and fix everything with your checkbook." "I'm not here to fix everything," Curtis said, leaning forward. "But I'm not walking away this time." Before Esme could respond, a soft cry came from the bedroom. Brinley. The tension in the room shifted as Esme stood and moved toward the door, her maternal instincts taking over. Curtis stayed behind, watching as the door closed softly behind her. He exhaled, leaning back in the chair, his mind racing. He hadn't just come here to help. He had come to make things right. But as he looked around the apartment, filled with evidence of Esme's struggles, he realized how far he had to go. Esme sat across from Curtis at a small cafe on the east side of Austin, her hands tightly gripping the ceramic coffee mug in front of her. The aroma of freshly brewed espresso wafted through the air, but she couldn't bring herself to enjoy it. Every muscle in her body was tense as she stared at the man who, just hours ago, had barged back into her life after years of silence. Curtis, ever composed, sipped his black coffee as if this were any other business meeting. His tailored suit and polished demeanor were starkly out of place in the cozy, rustic cafe filled with students and local artists. Esme couldn't decide if she hated his calmness or envied it. He placed the mug down gently, folding his hands on the table as his piercing eyes met hers. "I want to help, Esme," he said, his voice steady but low enough not to draw attention. "I don't care what it takes or how awkward this is. Brinley deserves better than this, better than what I left you with." Esme flinched at his words, biting back the sharp retort that rose to her lips. Instead, she focused on the steam curling up from her mug, her mind racing. "Why now, Curtis? You've had years to care about what Brinley deserves, and you didn't even bother to call. Not once." His face tightened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of guilt in his usually unshakable expression. "You're right," he admitted, leaning forward slightly. "I don't have an excuse for what I did back then, but I've been thinking about it, about you, about her, every day since." Esme rolled her eyes. "So what? A little guilt, and now you're swooping in to save the day? Throw some money around and make yourself feel better?" Curtis didn't flinch at her sarcasm. Instead, he let out a slow breath, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't about me. This is about Brinley. I can't change the past, Esme, but I can do something now, and I want to." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her, but she refused to let it show. She set the mug down with a soft clink and crossed her arms over her chest. "You say you want to help, but do you have any idea what that actually means? It's not just about writing checks or showing up unannounced." "I know that," Curtis said, his voice softening. "And I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that I'm here for the right reasons." Esme stared at him, her resolve wavering for a moment before she steeled herself again. Fine, she said reluctantly. You want to help? Then start by staying out of my way. I don't need you disrupting Brinley's life. Curtis frowned but nodded. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Just let me be part of this, even if it's just in the background. Esme didn't respond. She glanced out the window, watching the Austin traffic crawl by, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She didn't know what Curtis's sudden reappearance would mean for her or Brinley, but she knew one thing. She wasn't ready to let her guard down yet. Esme walked briskly toward the door, her emotions swirling like a storm. Curtis had offered to walk her home, but she had shut him down before he could even finish the sentence. She needed space, space to think, space to breathe. But as she stepped out into the cool Austin evening, the reality of her situation settled heavily on her shoulders. Curtis caught up to her outside the cafe, his steps purposeful but not rushed. Esme, he called, his tone calm but insistent. Wait a second. She stopped mid-step, her shoulders tensing before she turned to face him. What now, Curtis? Haven't you said enough? He hesitated, his eyes searching hers for a moment. I know you don't trust me. Honestly, I don't blame you, but I'm serious about helping, and not just financially. Esme folded her arms defensively. What does that even mean? You think you can just walk back into Brinley's life without any consequences? She doesn't even know who you are. Curtis's jaw tightened, and he took a measured breath before responding. I know this will take time. I don't expect anything overnight, but I'm not going to disappear again. Not this time. Esme wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man who had walked out on her and their daughter could somehow redeem himself. But the wounds were still raw, the scars of his absence etched deep into her life. You don't get to make promises, Curtis, she said, her voice low and edged with bitterness. Not after everything. I'm not making promises, he said, stepping closer but keeping a careful distance. I'm asking for a chance to earn them. Before Esme could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Grateful for the distraction, she pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was Claire. Hey, she said, answering quickly and turning slightly away from Curtis. What's up? Claire's voice crackled through the receiver, warm but concerned. Just checking in. You okay? You seemed pretty shaken earlier. Esme glanced over her shoulder at Curtis, who was standing patiently, his hands in his pockets. I'm fine, just sorting some things out. Well, if you need a break from all that sorting, come by my place, Claire said. I just opened a bottle of wine, and it's not going to finish itself. Esme chuckled softly, despite the weight in her chest. Thanks, Claire. I might take you up on that. As she hung up, Curtis spoke again. Claire's still in your corner, huh? Esme turned to face him fully, her eyes narrowing. She's always been in my corner, unlike some people. The jab landed, but Curtis didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded, as if accepting her anger. Good. You deserve people like her in your life, and so does Brinley. Esme shook her head, exasperated. Stop trying to win me over with these noble statements, Curtis. If you want to help, stay out of our way. For the first time, Curtis's calm facade cracked slightly. His lips pressed into a thin line, and a flicker of frustration crossed his face. You keep saying that, but it's not going to happen. I'm not going anywhere, Esme. I can't. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Esme sighed, rubbing her temples. Fine. If you're so determined to help, then prove it. But don't expect me to make this easy for you. Curtis nodded once, his expression resolute. I wouldn't expect anything less. Without another word, Esme turned and walked away, leaving Curtis standing under the glow of the cafe's neon sign. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on her as she disappeared into the night. As she walked, her mind raced with unanswered questions. Why now? What did he really want? And most importantly, could she risk letting him back into their lives? The only thing she knew for sure was that nothing would be the same after this. And whether she liked it or not, Curtis Dalton was back, and he wasn't leaving any time soon. Esme adjusted Brinley's small backpack, glancing over her shoulder as they stepped out of the daycare center into the afternoon sun. The usual chatter of parents and children surrounded them, but Esme couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at her since the day Curtis had reappeared. She had half expected him to show up here, despite their tense conversation the night before. Thankfully, there was no sign of him. "Can we get ice cream, Mummy?" Brinley asked, her bright blue eyes wide with excitement. She clutched Esme's hand tightly, bouncing with each step. "Maybe later, sweetheart," Esme replied, her voice softer than usual as she scanned the parking lot. Her paranoia felt misplaced, but she couldn't ignore it. "We need to get home first." As they approached her old sedan, Esme felt the weight of a gaze on her. She turned sharply, her heart racing, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just a few other parents loading their kids into cars. Forcing herself to breathe, she buckled Brinley into her car seat and slid into the driver's seat. The drive home was uneventful, but her nerves remained on edge. She hadn't slept well, her thoughts consumed by Curtis's sudden involvement and the complications it could bring. The media hadn't caught wind of their connection, yet. But the thought of reporters camped outside her apartment or following her to daycare made her stomach churn. Her fears were realized sooner than she expected. As Esme pulled into her parking spot, her phone buzzed on the dashboard. She ignored it, focused on getting Brinley inside. But as they walked toward the entrance of the complex, a man with a camera stepped out from behind a nearby car. The camera's click echoed loudly in Esme's ears. "Miss Dalton!" the man called, his voice eager. "Can I get a moment of your time? How does it feel to have Curtis Dalton back in your life?" Panic surged through her as she pulled Brinley close and quickened her pace. "No comment," she said firmly, her voice shaking. She fumbled with her keys as she reached the door, the camera flashing behind her. "Is it true that he gave you $1 million?" the man pressed. "Is this a reconciliation or just a payout?" Esme's hands trembled as she unlocked the door and shoved it open. Once inside, she locked it behind her and leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Brinley looked up at her, confused. "Mommy, who was that man?" "No one important," Esme replied, forcing a smile. "Let's get you something to eat, okay?" As Brinley scampered into the kitchen, Esme grabbed her phone and checked the notification. It was a text from Claire. "You need to see this." Esme opened the attached link, and her heart sank. A news article had just gone live, complete with a photo of Curtis at her apartment the night before. The headline read, "Billionaire CEO Curtis Dalton makes a surprise visit to ex-wife. $1 million gesture sparks questions." Esme's hands shook as she gripped her phone, staring at the article in disbelief. The photograph captured Curtis standing at her doorway, his sharp suit a jarring contrast against the peeling paint of the apartment complex. The article wasted no time speculating about their relationship, weaving a narrative of a rekindled romance and financial entanglements. She scrolled further, her stomach sinking with every word. The piece painted her as a struggling single mother, desperate for her ex-husband's wealth to make ends meet. The comments were worse, filled with baseless judgments and cruel assumptions. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her attention to a new message from Claire. "Call me when you can. This is bad, Esme." "Bad?" It was a disaster. Esme took a deep breath, trying to push back the rising panic. She couldn't afford to let this spiral out of control, not with Brinley watching. Forcing herself to focus, she moved into the kitchen, where Brinley was happily munching on crackers at the small table. Her daughter's innocence was both a comfort and a reminder of what was at stake. "Mommy, can we watch cartoons after snack?" Brinley asked, crumbs dotting her cheeks. Of course, sweetheart, Esme replied, brushing a strand of hair from Brinley's face. I just need to make a quick phone call first. Brinley nodded, content with her snack, as Esme stepped into the hallway and dialed Claire. Her best friend picked up on the second ring. Esme, are you okay? Did you see the article? Claire's voice was laced with concern. I saw it, Esme said, her voice tight. How did this even happen? Who would… She stopped mid-sentence, the answer dawning on her. Curtis. His name was like a stone sinking in her chest. I don't know, Claire said hesitantly, sensing her friend's thoughts. But it doesn't matter how. What matters is what you're going to do about it. The media's going to latch onto this story, Esme. You need to be ready. Ready for what? Esme snapped, her frustration boiling over. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask for Curtis to come back, or the money, or… She stopped herself, her voice trembling. Claire's tone softened. I know, but you need to stay calm for Brinley. This isn't fair, but you've handled worse. You'll get through this. Esme nodded, even though Claire couldn't see her. You're right. I don't know what to do. How do I stop this? You can't stop the media from talking, Claire said. But you can control the narrative. If they're going to write about you, at least make sure it's on your terms. Esme frowned, unsure what Claire meant. But before she could ask, there was a knock at the door. Her stomach clenched. Not again. Hold on, she muttered, ending the call and approaching the door cautiously. Peeking through the peephole, she saw Curtis standing there, his expression unreadable. She hesitated, then opened the door a crack. What do you want? She asked, keeping her voice low. We need to talk, Curtis said firmly. About the article, and about what comes next. Esme narrowed her eyes. You mean the article that probably wouldn't exist if you hadn't shown up here unannounced? Curtis exhaled sharply, looking momentarily frustrated. I didn't leak anything, Esme, but now that it's out there, we need a plan. The media won't back off until they get something new to chew on. And what exactly do you suggest? Esme asked, crossing her arms. Curtis stepped closer, his voice lowering. A united front. If we don't give them a story, they'll make one up. We need to show them that Brinley's off limits and that you're not some charity case. The words stung, but Esme knew he was right. She didn't trust him, not fully, but she couldn't fight this battle alone. Brinley needed protection, and if Curtis was willing to help, she didn't have much choice. Fine, she said after a long pause. But this is for Brinley, not for you, and I'm calling the shots. Curtis nodded, his expression serious. Understood. As Esme closed the door behind him, she leaned against it, her heart still racing. She hated the thought of working with Curtis, but she hated the alternative more. The media frenzy wasn't just a nuisance, it was a threat to her and Brinley's privacy, and she would do whatever it took to keep her daughter safe. Esme sat on the edge of her couch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Curtis stood across the small living room, his posture straight and his gaze unwavering. The weight of their situation hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. Brinley was asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing outside their walls. I didn't ask for this, Esme said finally, her voice low but firm. I didn't ask for your help, for the money, or for the attention it's brought. Curtis nodded, his expression somber. I know, but it's here now, and ignoring it won't make it go away. She shook her head, frustration bubbling to the surface. You think I don't know that? I've been dealing with fallout my whole life, Curtis. It's not new to me. I'm not saying it is, he replied, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. What I'm saying is that you don't have to deal with this alone. Esme let out a bitter laugh. Oh, now you want to be a part of my life? Of Brinley's life? You didn't care when it mattered. I made mistakes, Curtis said, his voice soft but steady. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I didn't. But I'm here now, Esme. Let me fix this. Esme looked away, her throat tightening. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that no amount of money or media damage control could erase the years he had missed. But instead, she swallowed her anger, focusing on the more immediate threat. You said we need a plan, she said, her tone flat. So what's your big idea? Curtis hesitated for a moment before speaking. We control the narrative. Give the media just enough to satisfy their curiosity, but nothing that puts you or Brinley at risk. And how do you propose we do that? Esme asked, skeptical. We make a public statement, he said. Together, let them see that you're not some victim and that Brinley is off limits. Esme frowned, her stomach twisting at the thought. A public statement? Are you serious? That's just going to invite more attention. Not if we handle it right, Curtis replied. We don't need to give them details, just enough to shut down the speculation. Esme chewed on her lip, weighing his words. She hated the idea of putting herself in the spotlight, even briefly, but Curtis was right about one thing. The media wouldn't stop until they had something to chew on. Fine, she said reluctantly, but I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Brinley. Curtis nodded, his expression softening slightly. I wouldn't expect anything else. Before Esme could say more, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up and saw a text from Claire. Call me when you can. There's something you need to know. Her chest tightened as she glanced back at Curtis. This isn't over, she said, standing and heading toward the hallway. I need a minute. As she dialed Claire's number, her mind raced. Whatever her best friend had to say, Esme had a sinking feeling it wouldn't make things any easier. Esme pressed the phone to her ear as she paced the narrow hallway, her free hand fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. Claire picked up on the second ring, her voice cautious. Esme, I didn't want to alarm you, but I've been digging into some of the coverage about Curtis. There's something off about all this. Esme stopped pacing. What do you mean, off? Claire hesitated before answering. There's a reporter, Justin something, who's been covering Curtis's business deals for years. He's the one who wrote that hit piece on you. But here's the thing. He has a reputation for being connected to certain people. Esme's stomach churned. What kind of people? Shady ones, Claire said bluntly. Corporate rivals, disgruntled ex-partners, anyone with an axe to grind. I think someone's feeding him information to use against Curtis, and now against you. Esme leaned against the wall, her pulse quickening. Why would anyone target me? I'm a nobody compared to Curtis. You're not a nobody, Claire corrected. You're a mother, and you're tied to him. That makes you leverage. Esme closed her eyes, trying to keep her breathing steady. This wasn't just about media attention anymore. There was a deeper game being played, and she was caught in the middle. I don't know what to do, Claire, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to figure this out alone, Claire reassured her, but you need to be careful. Don't trust anyone, not even Curtis. Esme swallowed hard, her gaze drifting toward the living room where Curtis sat waiting. Thanks, Claire. I'll call you later. She hung up, taking a moment to collect herself before stepping back into the room. Curtis looked up, his sharp eyes scanning her face. Everything okay? He asked, his tone cautious. No, Esme said, crossing her arms. There's more going on here than just a nosy journalist. Curtis's expression darkened. What did Claire say? She thinks someone's feeding information to this reporter, Esme replied. Someone who has a grudge against you. Curtis's jaw tightened, and he looked away for a moment, his mind clearly working through the possibilities. It wouldn't be the first time, he muttered. What's that supposed to mean? Esme pressed, stepping closer. Curtis met her gaze, his expression grim. When you're at the top, people want to take you down. I've made enemies, Esme. Business rivals, ex-partners, even people I thought I could trust. This could be anyone. And now they're coming after me and Brinley, Esme said, her voice rising. Do you have any idea what you've dragged us into? Curtis stood, his calm exterior cracking. I didn't drag you into this. I'm trying to protect you. By putting us in the crosshairs, Esme shot back. This isn't protection, Curtis. This is chaos. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Curtis exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. I'll handle this, he said, his tone resolute. Whoever's behind this, I'll make sure they stop. How? Esme demanded. How do you plan to fight someone when you don't even know who they are? I'll find out, Curtis said, his voice low and steady. I've dealt with worse before. Trust me. Esme shook her head, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, fear, and something she couldn't quite name. Trust isn't something you just get, Curtis. You have to earn it. I know, he said quietly. And I will. Esme turned away, her arms wrapping around herself. She didn't know if she believed him, but for Brinley's sake, she hoped he was right. In the back of her mind, though, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much worse before they got better. Esme's day began like any other, but the air felt heavier, her movements slower. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond her line of sight. After the tense exchange with Curtis the night before, she had resolved to carry on as normal, for Brinley's sake, if nothing else. But normal felt increasingly out of reach. As she sat at the kitchen table, watching Brinley happily eat her cereal, her phone buzzed beside her. She picked it up, expecting a message from Claire or another notification about the media frenzy. Instead, her screen displayed an email with no subject line, sent from an address she didn't recognize. Her stomach twisted as she opened it. The message was short, but the words felt like a punch to the gut. You've taken enough from Curtis. If you want to keep your daughter safe, you'll leave him alone. No police. No games. Esme stared at the screen, her chest tightening. Her hand instinctively went to Brinley, who was humming a song between bites, blissfully unaware. "Mummy, can I have more milk?" Brinley chirped, holding up her empty cup. Esme forced a smile, her hands trembling as she took the cup. "Of course, sweetheart. 1 second." She moved to the fridge, using the moment to steady her breathing. Her mind raced with questions. Who would send such a message? How did they know where to contact her? Was this tied to Curtis? Or was it something more sinister? As she poured the milk, her thoughts returned to Claire's warning about Justin and the possibility of someone using her as leverage. The timing of this email made it clear the threat was real, and whoever was behind it was watching her closely. Once Brinley was settled, Esme slipped into the hallway and called Curtis. He picked up after the first ring. "What is it?" he asked, his tone sharp. He sounded like he was in the middle of something important, but Esme didn't care. "I just got a message," she said, keeping her voice low. "Someone's threatening me. They mentioned Brinley." Curtis was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold. "What did it say?" Esme quickly recounted the email. She heard Curtis curse under his breath. "Send it to me," he said. "I'll have my team trace it." "What if they can't?" Esme asked, her panic rising. "Whoever this is, they know about Brinley. They know how to reach me. What if—" "Esme, stop!" Curtis interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "We'll figure this out. You're not dealing with this alone." She wanted to believe him, but the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. "This isn't just about me, Curtis. If anything happens to Brinley—" "Nothing's going to happen to her," he said, his voice steely. "I'll make sure of it." Before Esme could argue, he added, "I'm sending someone to your place. Just stay put until they get there." Esme hung up, her mind still spinning. She leaned against the wall, clutching the phone as if it could protect her. This was no longer just about the media or Curtis's complicated past. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and Esme had no choice but to play along. Minutes felt like hours as Esme waited in the apartment, her mind a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Brinley sat on the floor in the living room, stacking blocks into a precarious tower, her innocent laughter a fragile reprieve from the storm brewing outside. Esme kept glancing at the clock, her nerves fraying with every tick. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. She moved quickly, peeking through the peephole to see a tall man in a dark jacket standing on the other side. His stance was firm, his expression unreadable. "It's Daniel," the man called, his voice calm but authoritative. "Curtis sent me." Esme hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door, opening it just enough to speak. "How do I know you're not part of this?" Daniel reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out a sleek black badge, holding it up for her to see. "Private security. I'm part of Curtis's team. He told me to get you and Brinley somewhere safe." Esme's grip on the door tightened. "I'm not going anywhere until I know what's going on." Daniel's expression softened slightly, his tone lowering. "I understand you're scared, but whoever sent that email isn't bluffing. Curtis is already working on tracing it, but until we have answers, it's better to be cautious." Esme glanced over her shoulder at Brinley, who was still engrossed in her blocks. The thought of uprooting her daughter, of leaving the small sense of normalcy they'd managed to maintain, felt unbearable. But the weight of the email pressed against her chest, leaving her with little choice. "Give me 5 minutes to get her ready," Esme said, her voice quieter now. Daniel nodded. "Take your time, but keep it quick." Esme gathered Brinley's things as efficiently as she could, her hands trembling as she stuffed essentials into a backpack. Brinley looked up, confused. "Where are we going, Mummy?" "Just a little trip, sweetheart," Esme said, forcing a smile. "We'll be back soon." Brinley accepted the answer easily, her trust in her mother unwavering. Esme envied that innocence as she zipped the bag and took Brinley's hand. Together they stepped outside, where Daniel was waiting by a sleek black SUV parked near the curb. "Get in," Daniel instructed, opening the door for them. Esme hesitated for a brief moment before climbing in with Brinley. The door shut behind them with a soft click, sealing them inside a bubble of leather and tinted glass. As the car pulled away, Esme finally spoke. "Where are we going?" "To a safe house," Daniel replied without looking back. "It's secure, private. Curtis thought it would be best until we know more." Esme nodded, though unease still gnawed at her. She stared out the window as the city blurred past, her thoughts spiraling. Every instinct told her to protect Brinley at all costs, but she couldn't ignore the growing fear that this was only the beginning. As the car slowed to a stop outside an unassuming house on the outskirts of town, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it briefly, his expression tightening. "Curtis just sent word. He found something. We'll know more soon." Esme stepped out of the car, holding Brinley close as Daniel led them inside. The house was modest, but equipped with high-tech security systems that hummed faintly in the background. For the first time all day, Esme exhaled a shaky breath, feeling a sliver of relief. But deep down, she knew the fight was far from over. Whoever had sent that email wasn't going to back down easily. and neither was she. The safe house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the security system and the occasional creak of the floorboards as Esme paced. Brinley had settled quickly, her excitement over the new surroundings masking any sense of danger. She played contentedly in the corner with the blocks Esme had hastily packed, her laughter a fragile echo of normalcy. But for Esme, normalcy felt like a distant memory. She couldn't sit still, her mind running in endless loops. Daniel had stepped outside to take a call, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The house was secure, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped, cornered by forces she couldn't see. Her phone buzzed on the table, startling her. She grabbed it quickly, her pulse quickening as she saw Curtis's name on the screen. "Did you find anything?" she asked as soon as she picked up, her voice tight. "Maybe," Curtis replied. His tone was measured, but she could sense the tension beneath it. "The email was routed through several proxies, but my team managed to trace it back to a burner account. We're still digging, but there's a pattern emerging." "What kind of pattern?" Esme pressed. Curtis hesitated, and for a moment she thought he might deflect. But then he sighed, his voice dropping slightly. "It's not just about you or Brinley. Whoever's behind this has been targeting me for a while, through my business, my personal life. This is just the latest move." Esme sank into a chair, her hand tightening around the phone. "So, what? We're collateral damage in some corporate revenge plot?" "I don't think it's that simple," Curtis said. "This feels personal." His words sent a chill down her spine. She thought of the email, the veiled threat against Brinley. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice quieter. "I've got my team running every lead," Curtis replied. "In the meantime, stay put. Daniel's there to keep you safe." Esme wanted to scream. Stay put? Was that all she was supposed to do while her life unraveled? But before she could respond, Curtis added, "Esme, I need you to trust me." "Just for now." Trust. The word felt heavy, almost foreign. But as much as she wanted to argue, she knew she had no better options. "Fine," she said reluctantly, "but you'd better figure this out fast." As she hung up, Daniel re-entered the house, his expression serious. "Curtis updated me," he said. "We've increased security on this property. You and Brinley will be safe here." Esme nodded, though the reassurance felt hollow. Safe? For how long? Esme leaned against the kitchen counter, staring blankly at the glass of water she'd poured but hadn't touched. The weight of Curtis's words pressed heavily on her. This wasn't just about money or even about her. It was about Brinley, and that made it unforgivable. Someone out there wanted to hurt them, and all she could do was sit in a strange house, relying on people she barely knew to keep her and her daughter safe. Daniel's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "You should try to rest," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I know it's hard, but you won't do Brinley any good if you're running on empty." Esme shot him a look, the frustration bubbling up again. "Rest? How am I supposed to rest when someone is threatening my daughter?" Daniel didn't flinch under her sharp tone. "Because you have people handling it. Let us do our job." She wanted to argue, to lash out, but the exhaustion in her bones was impossible to ignore. With a reluctant nod, she stepped away from the counter. "I'll try," she muttered, heading toward the small room where Brinley was playing. The sight of her daughter, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a doll in her hands, eased some of the tension in Esme's chest. Brinley looked up and smiled. "Mommy, can Dolly have a tea party?" Esme managed a small smile in return. "Of course she can, sweetheart." As Brinley busied herself setting up her imaginary tea set, Esme sat on the edge of the bed, watching her daughter with a bittersweet ache. Brinley's world was so simple, so untouched by the ugliness outside. But how long could Esme keep it that way? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Esme," he said carefully. "Curtis just sent over an update. He thinks he knows who's behind this." Esme stood quickly, her heart pounding. "Who?" Daniel hesitated, as if weighing how much to say. "Carter Reed. He's a former business associate of Curtis's. They had a falling out a few years ago. Something to do with a major acquisition that went sideways. Carter lost everything." "Everything?" Esme repeated, her mind racing. "And now he's using me and Brinley to get back at Curtis." "Looks like it," Daniel said grimly. "Curtis's team is working on tracking him down, but Carter's careful. This might take time." Esme's stomach churned. Time was the one thing they didn't have. "So what do we do until then? Just wait for him to make the next move?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not exactly. Curtis has a plan, but it's risky. He's trying to lure Carter out by setting up a fake financial transaction, something that will force him to reveal himself." "And if it doesn't work?" Esme asked, her voice trembling. "Then we adjust," Daniel said simply. "But for now, stay here. I'll let you know as soon as there's an update." Esme nodded, though her nerves were far from settled. As Daniel left the room, she knelt beside Brinley, pulling her into a tight hug. Brinley giggled, oblivious to her mother's fear. "It's okay, Mommy," Brinley said, patting Esme's shoulder. "You're strong." Esme's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she forced a smile. "That's right, sweetheart. I am." For Brinley, she would be, no matter what. Esme sat by the window in the safe house, her eyes scanning the empty street below. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Brinley was napping in the next room, her soft breathing the only sound in the otherwise silent house. Despite the security measures Daniel had put in place, Esme couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she snatched it up, her heart racing. It was Curtis. "We've made progress," he said without preamble. Carter took the bait. Esme's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "He's responding to the fake transaction we set up," Curtis explained. "It's a small amount, just enough to make him think it's real. My team is monitoring his activity." "And what happens next?" she asked, her voice tight. "If he tries to cash out or use the account, we'll have his location," Curtis said. "From there, we can act." Esme leaned back in her chair, her thoughts racing. "What do you mean by act? Are you sending the police?" Curtis hesitated. "Not yet. We need more than a location to make an arrest. If he gets wind that we're onto him, he could disappear again. Or worse." "Worse?" Esme repeated, her chest tightening. "What does that mean, Curtis?" "It means we're dealing with someone who's desperate," Curtis said, his tone grim. "Desperate people do stupid things. That's why you and Brinley need to stay exactly where you are." Esme gripped the phone tighter, frustration bubbling to the surface. "So what am I supposed to do? Just sit here and wait for him to make a move?" "For now, yes," Curtis said firmly. "I know it's not what you want to hear, but the safest place for you and Brinley is that house." Esme closed her eyes, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside her. "You'd better be right about this, Curtis," she said finally, "because if anything happens to her—" "Nothing will happen," Curtis interrupted. "I won't let it." Esme ended the call, tossing the phone onto the table with a frustrated sigh. She hated feeling powerless, but there was no clear path forward. All she could do was hope that Curtis's plan would work. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft noise behind her. She turned to see Brinley standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, can I have some juice?" Esme forced a smile, pushing her worries aside. "Of course, sweetheart, let's get you a snack." As she led Brinley into the kitchen, she resolved to stay strong for her daughter's sake. But the unease in her chest refused to fade. a constant reminder that the danger was far from over. As Esme poured juice into Brinley's cup, the faint hum of the security system in the house seemed louder than usual, an ever-present reminder of their isolation. Brinley sat at the small kitchen table, swinging her legs and humming a song she'd learned at daycare. Her carefree demeanor was a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Esme. Before she could sit down, the front door creaked open. Esme froze, her body instinctively shielding Brinley. A second later, Daniel's familiar figure appeared in the doorway. "Sorry," he said, raising a hand as if to calm her. "Didn't mean to startle you." Esme exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. "You could have knocked?" Daniel gave her a faint smile. "The house is secure. I wanted to check in." He glanced at Brinley, who waved at him with her juice cup. "Hi, Mr. Daniel." "Hi, Brinley," he said, his smile softening. Turning back to Esme, he motioned for her to follow him. "Can we talk in private?" Esme nodded and kissed Brinley's forehead. "Stay here, sweetheart. I'll be right back." Brinley nodded, returning to her juice and crayons. Esme followed Daniel into the small living room, crossing her arms as he closed the door behind them. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with something sterner, almost urgent. "What's wrong?" Esme asked, her voice low. "Carter's behavior is escalating," Daniel said, cutting straight to the point. "He's sent more emails to Curtis. They're getting more aggressive." Esme's stomach churned. "What do you mean by aggressive?" Daniel pulled out his phone and showed her the latest message. It was brief but chilling. "If you think you can trap me, you're wrong. I know where she is. I know where the kid is. You're running out of time." Esme's breath caught. "He knows where we are?" "Not necessarily," Daniel said quickly. "He could be bluffing, but we're not taking any chances. Curtis is doubling down on security. We've got people watching the perimeter now." Esme paced the room, her mind racing. "This isn't working," she said, her voice rising. "We're just sitting ducks here. If Carter is desperate, he'll come after us eventually." "We're not sitting ducks," Daniel said firmly. "We're drawing him out. Every move he makes gives us more information. We're closing in." Esme stopped and turned to face him. "And what if he closes in first? What if Brinley gets caught in the middle?" "She won't," Daniel assured her. "I promise you she won't." Esme wanted to believe him, but the fear in her chest refused to loosen its grip. She crossed her arms, her voice quieter now. "What do I do in the meantime? How do I keep her safe?" "Stay alert," Daniel said. "Keep Brinley close, and trust that we're doing everything we can." Esme nodded reluctantly, though the weight in her chest didn't lift. As Daniel stepped out to coordinate with the security team, Esme returned to the kitchen. Brinley was colouring happily, oblivious to the danger that loomed over them. Esme sat beside her, brushing a hand over her daughter's curls. "Mommy," Brinley asked, looking up with wide eyes. "Are we going home soon?" Esme swallowed the lump in her throat. "Soon, sweetheart," she said softly. "Very soon." But as she watched her daughter colour, Esme couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was about to break. And when it did, she would have to be ready. Esme sat stiffly in the living room, her eyes fixed on the grainy security monitor Daniel had set up earlier. The screen displayed a static view of the perimeter outside the safe house. Empty streets, a parked car, and the dim glow of a street lamp flickering at irregular intervals. The image was still, but the tension in the room felt anything but. Daniel stood nearby, speaking quietly into his phone. His low voice carried a sense of urgency that only heightened Esme's anxiety. She glanced toward the hallway where Brinley was sleeping, her small form barely visible under the quilted blanket. The sound of her steady breathing was the only thing grounding Esme in the moment. When Daniel ended the call, Esme turned toward him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "What's the plan?" You said Curtis had a way to lure Carter out, but all I see is us sitting here, waiting for him to strike first. Daniel's jaw tightened, and he pulled a chair up beside her. The bait is set, he said, his voice calm but firm. Curtis initiated the transaction, and Carter's already taken the first step. He thinks he's in control. Esme leaned forward, her voice sharp. And what if he figures out it's a trap before you catch him? He's already threatening us. If he knows where we are— He doesn't, Daniel interrupted. He's bluffing to scare you. That's how people like him operate. He's trying to make you panic, hoping you'll slip up. Esme shook her head, her hands clenched into fists. You don't know that for sure. He's desperate, Daniel. Desperate people don't think logically. Which is exactly why we're staying one step ahead, Daniel replied. He hesitated before adding, Curtis is close to pinpointing his location. If Carter moves on the account again, we'll have him. Esme looked at him, her expression a mixture of doubt and fear. And if you don't— Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We will. You have my word. Before Esme could respond, the faint sound of a car engine hummed through the quiet night. She tensed, her eyes darting to the monitor. The screen showed the same parked car, but now a figure was moving near the edge of the frame. Daniel, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He moved quickly, his sharp gaze locking onto the screen. The figure hovered near the car for a moment before disappearing into the shadows. Daniel grabbed his phone and barked a command to his team. Check the west side. Now. Esme's heart pounded as she stood beside him. Is it him? Daniel shook his head, his expression unreadable. Could be. Could be nothing. Stay here. Before Esme could protest, he was out the door, his movements quick and precise. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at the screen. The street looked still again, but the unease gnawing at her refused to fade. Esme hovered near the security monitor, her breath shallow as she watched the still frame of the street outside. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Brinley's soft snores from the other room offered a faint sense of normalcy, but the fear gripping Esme's chest was all-consuming. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she snatched it up, expecting a message from Daniel. Instead, it was Curtis. What's going on? Curtis asked, his voice sharp and focused. Daniel's outside, Esme whispered, her eyes darting between the monitor and the darkened hallway. There was someone near the house. He went to check. There was a pause on Curtis's end, then a low curse. It's too soon. Carter shouldn't know you're there. Are you sure it wasn't one of the security team? Esme's grip on the phone tightened. I don't know. Daniel didn't say. He just left. Lock the doors, Curtis instructed, and stay away from the windows. I'll send reinforcements. Before Esme could respond, a loud thud came from the back of the house. Her heart stopped. She spun toward the hallway, her mind racing. Curtis, she whispered, her voice trembling. Someone's inside. Stay calm, Curtis said immediately. Get Brinley and lock yourselves in the safest room, now. Esme didn't need to be told twice. She dropped the phone into her pocket and sprinted down the hallway, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. Brinley was still asleep, her small body curled under the blanket. Esme scooped her up, careful not to wake her, and carried her to the bathroom, the only room in the house with a lock and no windows. Once inside, Esme set Brinley down on the floor and locked the door behind them. Her hands were shaking so badly that it took 2 tries to turn the latch. Brinley stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Mommy, she murmured, her voice groggy. What's happening? It's okay, sweetheart, Esme whispered, crouching beside her. We're just playing a little hiding game. Can you be really quiet for me? Brinley nodded, her small hands clutching her doll tightly. Esme pressed a kiss to her forehead, her own fear threatening to overwhelm her. She grabbed the phone from her pocket and dialed Daniel, her pulse thundering in her ears. "Daniel," she whispered urgently when he answered. "Someone's in the house." "Stay where you are," Daniel said immediately. "I'm coming back now. Don't make a sound." The line went dead, leaving Esme alone with nothing but the sound of her own breathing and Brinley's quiet sniffles. She pressed her back against the door, her hand gripping the only thing she could find, a metal toilet brush holder. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. Minutes passed like hours. Every creak of the house made Esme's heart jump. She thought she heard footsteps, faint but deliberate, moving through the living room. She held her breath, clutching the makeshift weapon tightly. Brinley's small hand reached for hers, and Esme squeezed it, her resolve hardening. A loud crash echoed through the house, followed by muffled voices. Esme's grip tightened as she braced herself, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Finally, Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. "Esme, it's safe now." She didn't move at first, fear rooting her in place, but then she heard him again, louder this time. "Esme, it's me. You can come out." Slowly she unlocked the door, peeking out to see Daniel standing in the hallway, his gun drawn but lowered. Behind him, 2 members of the security team were inspecting the broken back window. Esme stepped out, still holding Brinley close. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel's face was grim. "It wasn't Carter, but someone was definitely sent to test our defenses. They're getting bolder." Esme felt a chill run down her spine. "So what now?" "Now," Daniel said, his voice firm. "We make sure they don't get another chance." Esme sat at the kitchen table in the safe house, her fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of lukewarm tea she had forgotten to drink. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a broken record. The intruder, the crash of the window, and Daniel's grim expression as he explained that this was only the beginning. She had barely slept, every creak of the house jolting her awake, her body on high alert. Brinley was still asleep in the bedroom, her small form bundled under layers of blankets. The innocence on her face as she slept was the only thing keeping Esme from completely unraveling. But even that small comfort felt fragile, like it could be shattered at any moment. Daniel walked into the kitchen, his expression as serious as ever. He set his phone down on the table and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Curtis wants us to move," he said, cutting straight to the point. Esme's grip on the mug tightened. "Move where? How is that going to solve anything?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The safe house isn't secure anymore. Last night proved that. We need to stay ahead of whoever's doing this." "Whoever's doing this?" Esme repeated, her voice sharp. "It's Carter. We know it's him. Why hasn't Curtis done something about it?" "He's trying," Daniel said evenly. "Carter's covering his tracks, but Curtis's team is closing in. Last night gave us more information. We tracked the car the intruder used. It's only a matter of time." "Time?" Esme muttered bitterly. "That's all anyone keeps saying. Meanwhile, Brinley and I are stuck in the middle of this." "I know it's hard," Daniel said, his tone softening. "But Curtis is doing everything he can to keep you safe." "We all are." Esme shook her head, her frustration bubbling over. "It's not enough. We're sitting here waiting for Carter to make his next move. What if next time he doesn't just send someone to test the waters? What if he—" Her voice broke, and she looked away, unable to finish the thought. Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm. "That's not going to happen. We're moving you and Brinley to a more secure location. After that, Curtis has a plan to draw Carter out. But you need to trust us." Esme wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the look in Daniel's eyes stopped her. He wasn't just saying what she wanted to hear. He believed it, and for now, that would have to be enough. "Fine," she said quietly. When do we leave? Tonight, Daniel replied. Pack only what you need. I'll handle the rest. As Daniel left to make preparations, Esme sat in the kitchen for a few more moments, trying to steady her breathing. She hated feeling powerless, hated relying on Curtis and his team, but the thought of Brinley's safety gave her no choice. That night, the safe house was shrouded in silence as Daniel's team loaded their belongings into unmarked vehicles. Brinley clung to Esme's hand, her eyes wide with curiosity but untroubled by fear. To her, this was just another adventure. Esme envied that innocence, even as she wished she could shield Brinley from the truth forever. The drive was long and tense, the dark streets of Austin blurring past them as Esme sat in the back seat with Brinley asleep against her shoulder. Daniel drove with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times before, his focus unshaken. Every so often, he glanced in the rearview mirror, scanning the road behind them for any signs of danger. Finally, they arrived at a new location, a larger house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by high fences and equipped with what Daniel assured her was state-of-the-art security. Esme didn't feel reassured, but she stepped out of the car, clutching Brinley tightly. Inside, the house was stark but functional. Daniel immediately set about checking the security systems, leaving Esme alone to settle Brinley into a room. She watched her daughter sleep, the rise and fall of her tiny chest, a reminder of what was at stake. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her attention away. It was a message from Curtis. "We're almost there. Hang tight." "Almost there?" Esme frowned, her anxiety spiking. She hadn't been told Curtis would be joining them. Before she could respond, the sound of an approaching car caught her attention. She moved to the front window and peered outside, her heart racing as headlights illuminated the driveway. Daniel was already at the door, his hand resting on his sidearm. When the car came to a stop, Curtis stepped out, his expression as tense as hers. He wasted no time, striding toward the house with purpose. "We have a lead," Curtis said the moment he entered. "Carter's making his move." Esme's heart skipped a beat at Curtis's words. She stepped closer, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "What do you mean, making his move? I thought you were in control of the situation." Curtis turned to her, his expression sharp but composed. "We traced the vehicle from last night back to one of Carter's known associates. He's been using them to scout for weaknesses. But the transaction we set up, Carter bit harder than we expected. He's trying to move quickly, which means we're closing in." Esme wasn't reassured. "And how does that help us? He still knows about Brinley and me. He's not going to stop." "That's why we're not waiting anymore," Curtis said firmly. "We've set a trap. My team is luring him to a location where we'll have the advantage. Once he shows up, it's over." Daniel, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, spoke up. "This is a risk, Curtis. If Carter figures out it's a setup, he could try something reckless." "I know," Curtis replied. "That's why I'm here. I need to make sure Esme and Brinley are safe." Esme scoffed, her frustration boiling over. "Safe? Do you even hear yourself? You're dragging us deeper into this mess. Every move you make puts us in more danger." Curtis's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not dragging you into anything. Carter made this personal the moment he threatened Brinley. I'm doing everything I can to end this." "And what if you can't?" Esme shot back. "What if this plan of yours backfires?" "It won't," Curtis said, his tone resolute. "I won't let it." Before Esme could argue further, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. "Carter's on the move," he announced. "He's heading toward the location." Curtis nodded. "Good. Let's get into position." Esme's stomach churned. "Wait, you're going to confront him?" Curtis turned to her, his gaze steady. "Yes, the team and I will handle this. You and Brinley stay here. Daniel's second in command is already outside and the house is locked down. You'll be safe. Safe. The word felt hollow. Esme watched as Curtis and Daniel moved with purpose, gathering what they needed and heading toward the door. She wanted to stop him, to demand answers, but she knew it was futile. Curtis was determined, and nothing she said would change that. "Curtis," she called as he reached the door. He paused, looking back at her. "Be careful," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. His expression softened for a moment, and he nodded. "I will." And then he was gone. The hours that followed were some of the longest of Esme's life. She paced the house, glancing at her phone every few minutes, waiting for a message that never came. Brinley, thankfully, had fallen asleep again, her small frame curled up under the blankets. Esme checked on her frequently, her fear for her daughter's safety gnawing at her like a constant ache. Finally, her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, her hands shaking as she opened the message. It was from Daniel. "It's done. Carter's in custody." Esme's knees nearly gave out as relief flooded through her. She sank onto the couch, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. It was over. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to exhale. But even as she sat there, her thoughts turned to Curtis. What had the confrontation been like? Was he okay? Her relief was tempered by a lingering sense of unease. This wasn't just about Carter. It was about everything Curtis had brought back into her life. And despite the danger being gone, she wasn't sure if she was ready to face what came next. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped her out of her thoughts. She moved to the window, her heart racing as she saw Curtis step out of the vehicle. He looked tired but unharmed, his suit slightly rumpled and his expression unreadable. Esme opened the door before he could knock. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between them. "It's over," Curtis said finally, his voice quiet. Esme nodded, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure?" Curtis hesitated, then nodded again. "Carter's in custody. He won't bother you or Brinley again." The relief on Esme's face was fleeting. "And what about us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What happens now?" Curtis looked at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. "That's up to you." Esme swallowed hard, her emotions a tangled mess. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever came next, she would face it head on. For Brinley, for herself, and maybe, just maybe, for Curtis too. The quiet of the night felt heavier than it should have, as if the weight of everything Esme had endured was pressing down on her all at once. She stood at the window, arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring out at the faint glow of the streetlights. The confrontation with Carter was over, but the tension in her chest refused to dissipate. Curtis had left hours earlier, after ensuring she and Brinley were safe. His parting words lingered in her mind. "That's up to you." They echoed with a finality that felt both unsettling and incomplete. She wanted to feel relieved, but all she felt was the gnawing uncertainty of what lay ahead. The sound of Brinley stirring pulled her from her thoughts. Esme turned toward the small bedroom where her daughter slept, the soft glow of a nightlight spilling into the hallway. Brinley had been her constant through all of this, the one thing that kept her grounded. But as much as Esme wanted to believe the worst was behind them, a small voice in the back of her mind kept whispering that it wasn't. Her phone buzzed on the counter, jolting her. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Curtis's name on the screen. "Hello?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to see you," Curtis said, his tone low but urgent. "There's something you need to know." Esme frowned, her grip tightening on the phone. "What is it? Can't you just tell me now?" "Not over the phone," Curtis replied. "It's complicated." Her stomach churned. The last thing she wanted was more complications. But the seriousness in Curtis's voice made it impossible to ignore. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "When?" "I'm already on my way," he said. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. The line went dead before she could respond. Esme set the phone down, her anxiety spiking. She paced the small kitchen, her mind racing with possibilities. What could Curtis possibly need to tell her now? Wasn't it enough that Carter was gone, that the immediate danger had passed? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway brought her pacing to an abrupt halt. She moved to the window, her breath catching as she saw Curtis step out of the vehicle. He looked more worn than usual, his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled. But his expression was what caught her attention. There was something in his eyes she couldn't quite place, a mix of determination and vulnerability. She opened the door before he could knock. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Curtis hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. He closed the door behind him and turned to face her. "I didn't tell you everything," he said quietly. Esme crossed her arms, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "What do you mean? About Carter?" "No," Curtis said, shaking his head. "Not about Carter, about why I left." His words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Esme's frustration gave way to confusion. "What are you talking about? You left because you didn't want to be a father or a husband. Isn't that what you said?" Curtis's jaw tightened, and he looked away for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "That's what I wanted you to think," he admitted. But it wasn't the truth. Esme felt a cold knot form in her chest. Then what was the truth? Curtis took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Before we met, I was engaged," he began. "Her name was Caroline. We were together for 3 years, and we lost a child. She was 7 months pregnant when it happened." Esme stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I never told you," Curtis said. "I thought I'd moved past it. But when you got pregnant with Brinley, everything came flooding back. I was terrified of failing you, of failing her." Esme's hands tightened into fists. "So you ran." "Yes," Curtis said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was hurt you, and Brinley." The room fell silent, the weight of Curtis's confession settling over them like a heavy blanket. Esme's emotions were a whirlwind, anger, sadness, and something she couldn't quite name. "You should have told me," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You should have given me a chance to understand." "I know," Curtis said, his eyes filled with regret. "And I've spent every day since wishing I had." Esme turned away from Curtis, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she tried to process what he'd just told her. The revelation felt like a punch to the gut, dredging up years of pain and resentment she thought she'd buried. Curtis had carried this secret the entire time they'd been together, and even after he left. She had blamed herself for years, thinking she hadn't been enough. Enough for him to stay, enough to make him fight for their family. And now, she didn't know how to feel. "You think this excuses what you did?" she asked, her voice low and brittle. She turned back to him, her eyes blazing. "You think this makes it okay?" "No," Curtis said firmly, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his expression. "I'm not trying to excuse anything. I just wanted you to know the truth." "The truth?" Esme echoed bitterly. "The truth that you decided I couldn't handle. The truth that you kept from me while I raised our daughter alone." Curtis took a step closer, his hands at his sides, palms open. "I didn't tell you because I was scared, Esme. Not of you, but of myself. I didn't think I could be the father Brinley deserved, and I thought, if I left, you'd be better off without me." Esme's breath hitched, and she shook her head, anger and heartbreak warring inside her. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To us? I had to explain to Brinley why her father wasn't there. I had to answer her questions when she asked if you didn't love her. Curtis flinched as if she'd slapped him, and for a moment he looked utterly broken. I did love her. I do. I never stopped. Then why didn't you fight for us? Esme demanded, her voice rising. Why did you wait until now to show up and act like you care? Because I didn't know how to fix it, Curtis said, his voice cracking. I thought I was protecting you by staying away, but when I saw that text, when I realized how much you were struggling, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't keep running. Esme's chest tightened, the raw honesty in his voice cutting through her anger. She wanted to scream at him, to push him away, but the part of her that still cared, the part she'd tried so hard to bury, kept pulling her back. She sank into a chair at the kitchen table, burying her face in her hands. Curtis hesitated for a moment before sitting across from her. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to comfort her. He just waited, his presence steady but unobtrusive. I don't know if I can forgive you, Esme said finally, her voice muffled but thick with emotion. You left us, Curtis. You left me to pick up the pieces. I know, he said quietly, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, to Brinley. But I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I've changed. Esme looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce. How am I supposed to believe that? How do I know you won't run again the next time things get hard? Curtis leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Because I'm not the same man I was back then. I can't change the past, Esme, but I can change what I do moving forward. I want to be here. For you. For Brinley. For us. Esme let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she wiped at her eyes. It's not that simple. I know, Curtis said. And I don't expect it to be. But I'm not going anywhere, Esme. Not this time. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt heavy with unspoken words, but for the first time in a long time, there was also a flicker of hope. Esme didn't know if she could trust Curtis, didn't know if she could open herself up to the possibility of being hurt again, but a part of her wanted to try, for Brinley, if nothing else. You want a chance, she said finally, her voice steady but soft. Then prove it. Show me that you mean what you say. Curtis nodded, his expression resolute. I will. Esme exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. There was still so much to work through, so much pain and mistrust to overcome. But as Curtis sat across from her, his eyes filled with a quiet determination, she realized that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. Brinley's sleepy voice called from the hallway, breaking the moment. Mommy? Are you okay? Esme turned toward her daughter, her heart aching with love and protectiveness. She stood and crossed the room, pulling Brinley into her arms. I'm okay, sweetheart, she said softly. We're okay. As she held her daughter close, Curtis stood silently nearby, his presence steady and unyielding. For the first time in years, Esme allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could heal. Esme stood in the doorway of Brinley's room, watching her daughter carefully line up her stuffed animals in preparation for another imaginary tea party. The simplicity of Brinley's joy never failed to amaze her, even in the face of everything they had endured. It was moments like these that reminded Esme of what truly mattered and why she couldn't afford to falter. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the quiet moment. She stepped into the hallway, glancing at the screen to see a message from Claire. Saw the news. Curtis made a statement about Carter. People are already talking. You okay? Esme sighed, leaning against the wall. She hadn't expected Curtis to go public so soon, but part of her knew it was inevitable. He'd made it clear that the best way to protect her and Brinley from further scrutiny was to control the narrative. Still, the thought of being thrust back into the public eye made her stomach churn. She typed a quick reply to Claire. "I'm fine. Just trying to keep things normal for Brinley," before pocketing her phone and heading to the kitchen. The house was quiet, save for the occasional clatter of Brinley's tea set. Esme poured herself a cup of coffee, her thoughts drifting to Curtis's late-night confession. His words had been heavy, laden with regret and vulnerability, but they had also carried a promise that she wasn't sure she could believe just yet. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Esme's heart jumped as she set the coffee down and moved cautiously toward the front of the house. Peeking through the window, she relaxed slightly when she saw Curtis standing on the porch, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. She opened the door, raising an eyebrow at him. "Wildflowers?" Curtis gave a small, sheepish smile. "I thought you might like them." Esme crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "You think flowers are going to fix everything?" "No," Curtis admitted, his tone soft but earnest. "But it's a start." She stepped aside, letting him in. As he placed the flowers on the kitchen counter, Esme leaned against the wall, watching him. He seemed different, less guarded, more present. It was a stark contrast to the Curtis she had known during their marriage, and it left her feeling both hopeful and wary. "What's with the grand gesture?" she asked, breaking the silence. Curtis turned to face her, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about proving myself." "And?" Esme prompted, her arms still crossed. "And I know it's not going to happen overnight," Curtis said, "but I'm ready to do whatever it takes, not just for you, but for Brinley too." Esme studied him for a long moment, her defenses still firmly in place. "Words are easy, Curtis. Actions aren't." "Then let me show you," Curtis said simply. "I'll start wherever you need me to." Before Esme could respond, Brinley's cheerful voice rang out from the other room. "Mommy, come play with me." Esme glanced toward the sound, then back at Curtis. "She's waiting," she said, her tone softer now. Curtis nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Then let's not keep her waiting." Curtis followed Esme into the living room, where Brinley had meticulously arranged her stuffed animals around the small plastic table. She beamed at the sight of Curtis, waving enthusiastically. "Hi, Daddy, you can sit here," she said, pointing to a tiny chair between a floppy-eared bunny and a bear wearing a frilly pink dress. Curtis hesitated for a moment, his towering frame looking comically out of place as he lowered himself into the seat. The plastic creaked under his weight, but Brinley didn't seem to notice. She handed him a tiny teacup, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "This is for you," she said. "It's pretend tea, but you have to say thank you before you drink it." Curtis's lips twitched with amusement. "Thank you, Miss Brinley," he said, raising the cup to his lips and pretending to sip. "This is the best tea I've ever had." Brinley giggled, her laughter filling the room. Esme watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, but her expression softening. Seeing Curtis like this, engaged, attentive, and genuinely present, was something she hadn't expected. It stirred emotions she wasn't ready to confront, but she couldn't deny how happy it made Brinley. As the tea party continued, Curtis played along, taking his cues from Brinley with a patience and enthusiasm that surprised even Esme. He answered her endless questions about the stuffed animals' imaginary lives, helped fix a crooked tea plate, and even wore a paper crown Brinley had insisted was necessary for her special guest. When the tea party finally wound down, Brinley yawned, her energy fading. Esme scooped her up, planting a kiss on her forehead. "Time for a nap, sweetheart." Brinley nodded sleepily, clutching her bunny as Esme carried her to her room. Curtis stayed behind, tidying up the remnants of the tea party without being asked. By the time Esme returned, he was placing the last stuffed animal back in its spot. "You didn't have to clean up," she said, leaning against the doorway. Curtis shrugged, straightening up. It felt right. She really loves that bunny, doesn't she? Esme nodded, her gaze flickering to the neatly arranged toys. She's had it since she was born. It's her comfort. Curtis hesitated, then stepped closer. I want to be that for her too. Someone she can rely on. Esme studied him, her defenses faltering just slightly. She's young, she forgives easily, but me, it's not so simple. I know, Curtis said, his voice steady. And I don't expect it to be. But I meant what I said. I'll prove it to you, Esme. One day at a time, if that's what it takes. For the first time, Esme felt the smallest crack in the wall she had built around herself. She didn't respond right away, but she didn't push him away either. Instead, she nodded, her voice soft. One day at a time. Curtis's expression softened, and for a moment, the tension between them eased. They still had a long way to go, but in that quiet room filled with the remnants of Brinley's tea party, it felt like a start. The backyard buzzed with quiet laughter and the soft chatter of a small group of friends. Esme stood near the edge of the patio, watching Brinley dart between Curtis and Claire as they tried to help her hang colourful paper lanterns. The warm glow of twilight bathed the scene, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Esme allowed herself to relax. Curtis had gone all out for Brinley's birthday. The yard was filled with balloons, a small table piled high with gifts, and a homemade cake that Claire had insisted on baking. It was intimate, just a handful of people who mattered most, but it was perfect. Brinley squealed with delight as Curtis lifted her onto his shoulders so she could place the last lantern on the string. "Hiya, Daddy! I can almost reach," she giggled, her little arms stretching as far as they could go. "I've got you," Curtis said, his tone filled with warmth. "Just a little to the left." Esme couldn't help but smile as she watched them. There had been a time when she thought she'd never see this side of Curtis, a father who was present, attentive, and completely in tune with his daughter. It was still surreal, and while the wounds from their past hadn't fully healed, she couldn't deny how far he'd come. Claire sidled up to Esme, handing her a glass of sparkling cider. "You look like you're in another world," she said with a knowing smile. Esme chuckled softly. "Just thinking. A lot's changed." "Yeah, I noticed," Claire said, glancing at Curtis and Brinley. "You letting him back in?" Esme hesitated, her gaze lingering on Curtis. "I don't know. Maybe. He's trying, and Brinley adores him." "And you?" Claire asked gently. Esme sighed, swirling the cider in her glass. I think I'm learning how to trust him again. It's not easy, but he's here. He's really here." Claire nodded, squeezing her arm. "That's a start." As the lanterns were finally hung and the last of the decorations in place, Curtis approached Esme, a hint of nervousness in his expression. "Can we talk?" he asked, keeping his voice low so Brinley wouldn't overhear. Esme nodded, following him to the side of the yard, where the sounds of laughter and celebration faded into the background. Curtis stopped near the edge of the yard, the fading sunlight casting a golden hue over his face. He looked at Esme, his hands tucked into his pockets, a flicker of uncertainty in his normally confident demeanor. "I just wanted to say thank you," he began, his voice steady but soft, "for letting me be a part of today, for letting me try." Esme crossed her arms, watching him carefully. "It wasn't easy, you know, letting you back in." "I know," Curtis said, his gaze meeting hers. "And I don't take it for granted. Every moment I've had with Brinley and with you, it's reminded me of everything I almost lost. Everything I don't want to lose again. Esme's chest tightened. There was something raw and genuine in his voice, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. She took a deep breath, her words measured. You've come a long way, Curtis, but it's not just about today. It's about tomorrow and the day after that. Curtis nodded, stepping closer. I'm not going anywhere, Esme. I mean that. I know I can't erase the past, but I want to be part of the future. Your future, Brinley's future, whatever that looks like. Esme looked down, her emotions a tangled mess. She wanted to believe him, but trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. Still, he'd shown her more in the past few weeks than he ever had before. He had stayed, even when things got hard. He had fought for their daughter, and for her. She met his gaze again, her voice quiet but firm. This isn't just about promises, Curtis. It's about showing up. Every day. I will, he said without hesitation. I promise you, Esme. I'll be here. For the first time in years, Esme felt a small spark of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. She nodded, a tentative smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Then let's see where this goes. Curtis's face softened, relief washing over him. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. Before Esme could respond, Brinley's voice called out from the patio. Mommy, Daddy, it's cake time. Esme laughed softly, the tension in her chest easing. Duty calls, she said, turning back toward the celebration. Curtis fell into step beside her, and as they joined Brinley and their friends around the table, Esme felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. There was still work to be done, still wounds to heal and trust to rebuild, but for the first time she believed it was possible. As Brinley blew out her candles, her laughter echoing through the yard, Esme caught Curtis's eye. He smiled at her, a smile that spoke of second chances and a future worth fighting for. And for the first time in years, Esme smiled back.